Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 19th of July of 2023. Today we have significant number of updates, so let's start. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Russians, have officially announced the trade and naval blockade of Odessa port. They reported that at 12 p.m. of the local time on the 20th of July, they will block this port and they will consider every single ship heading in direction of Odessa port as a ship who has munition and ammo on board. The Russians haven't reported that they will destroy or attack these ships, but I believe that the Russians are going to raise the stakes, and if they understand and know for sure, they will do and they will make some actions against this or that ship. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense reported that currently it is very dangerous to be in this area because of mines, because of significant number of mines in the Black Sea. I'll remind you that the previous night the Russians made significant missile attack against Odessa. During the videos that we get during the previous night, we haven't received and we didn't understand the real number of forces and the real number of missiles and drones that the Russians were used. But today, during the day, we got some kind of pictures from the raiders, and these pictures, as I understand, was made by the Russian forces. They published this and they gave these pictures to the open source, and basically on these pictures you can see a lot of red dots, a lot of red icons, and every single red icon, red arrow, is either missile or drone or rocket or maybe even a plane or air forces. So as you can see, there were significant number of missiles of all these types of weapon that were launched in direction of Odessa region. And basically, according to these pictures, we see that there were at least three directions of Russian attack. There was direction in the central direction was in Odessa. So the first, according to that picture, we see that one of the waves of attack was in direction of Odessa, and the missiles and rockets were flying along this direction. The second direction was in the south. You see this one, and the second direction was heading in direction of the southern part of Odessa region. And there was the third direction, and the third direction was about the southern part of Nikolaev, probably area, we can say. And this is the third wave of attack. So basically the Russians attack a lot of facilities, a lot of big number of military positions, military objects all along the bank of Black Sea River in Odessa and Nikolaev region. We had a lot of videos of those explosions, and this is one of the probably video that show us the significant results of those missile attacks. We see a lot of explosions, heavy explosions in the city along the ports, and this morning the Russian sources published and the Ukrainian sources published the photo of the results of those attacks, and this is the photo of Odessa port, and basically the Russians destroyed the part of the port that Ukrainians were using for packing the ships that arrived in Odessa port. Furthermore, the Russian sources published another video, another photo. It's satellite photo of Odessa airport. This video is geolocated, this one, and basically this photo shows the fire on the territory in the vicinity of the airport. So basically we see that as a result of missile attack, the Russians managed to destroy the warehouses, ammo depots, fuel depots, and so on. And this is just a video and photo confirmations of results of the central middle part of attack. And according to the picture we saw of the waves of attack, the Russians also were attacking the southern Odessa region. There are a lot of airports, and the NATO countries and the United States of America tried to use this region for building military infrastructure, for drones, for railroad ways, for supporting Ukraine. So that was a primary target, as I understand, for the Russians, because the recent Ukrainian attack of drones and Navy drones that the Ukrainians were using were made from the southern part of Ukraine, not from Odessa, but from this area, and the Russians were trying to destroy it. Also, a lot of attacks took place in this part of Odessa and Nikolaev region, and this area was used by the Ukrainians at the training centers as for Ukrainian marine forces, for Ukrainian boats, for Ukrainian ships, and so on. So as you can see, the Russians managed to deal significant damage to the Ukrainian forces in Odessa and Nikolaev region. Now we're moving to Crimea, the Ukrainians, as a response to Russian attack, made their own missile attack against the Russian ammo depot in Crimea. There are still fire in this area, and there are still a lot of explosions, and the Russian authorities announced about evacuation of 3 settlements in this area. Now let's move to the ground and let's start with Kherson region. The Russians published another video how they continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Antonov Bridge, and the Russians claims that as a result, particularly of that attack, the Ukrainians lost around 40 soldiers. And but as you can see, this is another suicide operation from the Ukrainian side, when they're trying to hold a territory that doesn't have any value, at least for the Russians, because the Russians step back from this territory, and currently the Russians understand that this is a perfect position for them, for its artillery back. The Russians can control the Dnipro River, and they can control the number of Ukrainian ships in this river, and they exactly understand every single second how many Ukrainian forces have been landed on this part of Dnipro River, and they can use this piece of information for bombing and shelling this territory. Furthermore, the Russians currently use new tactic. They also not just bomb the ships, they also bomb the ships, not just Antonov Bridge, but also they bomb the ships that Ukrainians use for evacuation purposes. So these new tactics led for increasing of losses of the Ukrainians on this part of the front line. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Kherson area, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-30. Now we're moving to Petykhatki area. Today, another day, yet we haven't received any updates from the Ukrainian, neither from the Ukrainian or from the Russian side, about any activity on this front line. So that's mean that Ukrainians continue regrouping. We haven't received any even video confirmation of any situations. So we will bypass this territory and we will move to the Bradley Square. Today we got a lot of updates from this territory. As we discussed, the Russians continue using their benefits on the western flank of the main supply road. The Russians continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions along the main supply road that Ukrainians use for getting more forces in this sector. And the Russians published another video how they attack another armored vehicles of Ukrainian in this territory. So that's why the Ukrainians understand that they need to change their focus from the eastern side of the supply road to the western side. And during the day, the Ukrainians made at least 4 waves of attacks, 4 attempts to attack the Russian positions on the line between Nestyryanka, Kopony, Rabotina. The first 2 waves was very slow, very small. It was probably Reko in combat, and somewhere at 4 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that they managed to stabilize the front line. They showed some videos how they were bombing Orekhov, how the helicopters were flying above this territory and so on. So the situation was stable. But somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that Ukrainians launched significant attack in this direction, exactly on the line between Nestyryanka, Kopony, and Rabotina, trying to develop their western flank of the main supply road that goes from Orekhov to Rabotina. And the Russians reported that Ukrainians currently, during this attack that continues right now, this attack hasn't ended by the beginning of making this video. Probably when you see this video, the operation will be finished. But anyway, the Ukrainians launched attack using the western weapon, including tanks, Leopards, and Bradley armored vehicles. So this is another significant wave of attack that will probably in a few hours bring us more video and photo confirmations of destroyed western weapon. Now we are moving to the Vremevka tactical bridgehead, where the Ukrainians during the previous days made a lot of attempts to attack Staromayorskaya, and today we got more video confirmations of those attacks. The Ukrainians were trying to enter the city from the north, but that attempt was failed and were defeated by the Russians, and the Ukrainians lost few armored vehicles and were forced to step back. Another attempt to attack from the western flank of that settlement, and basically in this video we see how the Ukrainians, after another unsuccessful attack, took a decision to step back, and under fire of Russian artillery systems they were withdrawing their positions. So anyway, the situation was stabilized by the Russians after a few days of clashes, but it doesn't mean that Ukrainians are not going to restart more attacks in this area. For now they need to finish and make some regrouping, and I believe that Ukrainians will increase the pressure on this part of Zaporozhye bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings from Petykhatki in Bradley Square, in Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and in the vicinity of Ugledar, the Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers, 15 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks and 5 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, they managed to destroy up to 7 ammo depots of Ukrainian brigades that are currently located on this part of the combat line, this front line. And the Russians also claimed that they destroyed another Ukrainian Raider AN-TPQ-50. Now we are moving to the South Donetsk area. We got just regular artillery duels. The Russians published the video how they were bombing and destroyed Ukrainian positions in Ugledar. The Ukrainians published the video how they were trying to track and discover Russian positions in the settlement in front of Ugledar. I'm talking about Pavlovka-Nikoyska, and they were just bombing regular buildings, probably the buildings, the Russian positions of their eyes, their machine gun positions, maybe small warehouses and so on, just regular artillery duels without any attempts from both sides to counterattack or attack each other. The Russians continue hunting and attacking the Ukrainian positions in Novomikhailivka. After a small operational pause that took previous few days, probably the Russians completed regrouping in the vicinity of fortification that located on the north of Novomikhailivka, and probably the Russians will soon try to make another attempt to attack the Ukrainian position, trying to force them to step back from this fortification. And for these purposes, the Russians started and launched artillery preparation that probably will take few days, and after that the Russians will attack one more time, trying to capture this stronghold and trying to force the Ukrainians to step back further to Novomikhailivka. Now we are moving to Mariinka and the battle. We are going to talk a little bit about the battle between Mariinka and Krasnogorovka, which still continue in this area. The Ukrainians have lost one of the most important strongholds on this bridgehead, but they still try to attack the Russians and they still try to force them to step back. This morning the Russians published another video of sending reserves and reinforcements in the direction of that coal mine, that industrial small area, and in this video we see how the Ukrainians try to attack one of the armored personnel carrier, but the carrier survived because this carrier was protected by the additional defense system. But anyway, later this video was published this morning, but during the day the Ukrainians published at least 2 videos from the same sector. The first one took place on the western flank of that battle. The Ukrainians shown the video how 2 drones or even 3 drones were attacking the Russian armored vehicles that were hidden by the Russians on the flank of that operation, and but that armored vehicle was destroyed as a result of the second attack. And later the Ukrainians also published another video, their vision and their understanding of the battle for that coal mine. Of course, the Ukrainians confirms that the Russians managed to capture that coal mine. There is no doubt about this, and the Ukrainians are not giving any other piece of information, but the Ukrainians saying that that victory for the Russians was paid with too much blood. That was another suicide operation, according to the Ukrainians, of Russians. And as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians shown us a lot of video and photo confirmations that they managed to destroy at least 9 armored vehicles of the Russians during that attempt of attack. But for now, we still will show this territory as a territory under Russian control, because the Ukrainians are using drones, artillery systems, just drones, artillery systems to attack Russian positions. But the Ukrainians still haven't launched any counter-offensive operation in this direction, probably. And I think that basically the Ukrainians don't have enough of armored vehicles to make this attack. They have just artillery and drones and infantry, but this is not enough to capture such a stronghold in comparison with the Russians, who has tanks. Maybe the Russians have already lost a lot of tanks during that attack, but currently the Ukrainians need almost the same number of armored vehicles to recapture this territory. And basically, as I understand, the Ukrainians still haven't got such a number of armored vehicles. Maybe they're waiting for some reinforcements and so on, and later they will launch attack. But anyway, this coal mine, and this is the industrial area, is under Russian control, and the longer the Russians are there, the better positions they have, and they're improving their positions almost every single day on this bridgehead. Of course, if the Russians are able to, as we discussed, to save control over this industrial area from this territory, they will be able to continue advancing to the north. They will be able to attack the Ukrainians along the railroad ways, and of course they will be able to cut any supply and any movements on the Ukrainians between Krasnogorovka and the northern part of Mariinka. Now we are moving to the northern flank of this territory, to the area of responsibility of 59th Motorized Brigade. Today the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were attacking, very fast attack in direction of Russian positions in the vicinity of Nivolska. As I understand, that attack was pretty successful, implemented by the Ukrainians, and probably this is the reason why the Ukrainians haven't still yet launched attack on the south. If we take a look at this video, we see that Ukrainians were using very light vehicles like Max Pro, like Kipri. There were no Bradleys or tanks, just light vehicles, just regular military vehicles, Max Pro and Kipri. And of course, this is not the type of vehicles that you need to attack and storm strongholds. That attack, as I understand, was pretty successfully implemented by the Ukrainians. They managed to capture these trenches and to force the Russians to step back. I believe that I will update this map and show that this corner was recaptured by the Ukrainians, but this is exactly the reason why the Ukrainians haven't launched their counterattack in Krasnogorovka. As I understand, there is a lack of armored vehicles on this part of the front line. Also, the Ukrainians published another video, another episode of storming Krasnogorovka, the Battle of Krasnogorovka. As we discussed, the Ukrainians have reactivated themselves in this area, and in this video was a very long video. The Ukrainians published how they were storming the forest line and trenches on the area between the railroad ways and Krasnogorovka. That was a very heavy battle, very heavy clashes between the Ukrainian stormtroopers and the Russian infantry who had positions along this forest line. As a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians managed to capture this area, so we will color this territory as well. And the Russians currently stick completely to Krasnogorovka and Vysyolia. Furthermore, the Ukrainians start artillery preparation of the southern flank of Vysyolia, trying to bomb and shell these positions. So I expect that very soon, maybe within the next 24 hours, the Ukrainians will launch massive attack in direction of Krasnogorovka from the north, between the settlements like Krasnogorovka and Vysyolia, in direction of Vysyolia itself, and of course in direction of Kamyanka. There are going to be very fierce battles. I believe that the Russians do have enough of time for regrouping and bringing some reserves, but anyway, this is going to be very fierce battles because the Ukrainians understand that this territory, this bridgehead, is vital for them, and if the Russians are able to hold this bridgehead, then we can start counting days before the Russians are able to encircle Avdiivka and to end the story of this stronghold. Now we're moving to Klishchiivka. We got a lot of very interesting updates during the day. The Ukrainians launched probably the strongest offensive operation in direction of that settlement. We got a lot of videos from this bridgehead and a lot of sources, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, and very reliable, confirmed that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians managed to capture this stronghold, this one. But the Russians are saying that if we say that dead bodies on the stronghold and the trenches means that let's say Ukrainian dead bodies all over the trenches means that Ukrainian control this territory, then yes, the Russians can agree with this piece of information. But when talking about like live people, real soldiers, according to the Russian sources, there are no Ukrainians. Most of the Ukrainian forces who entered the trenches were bombed and destroyed as a result of artillery fire from the Russian side. All these fields are completely filled with Ukrainian dead bodies. There were a lot of videos of clashes. Furthermore, the Russians report that at 6 p.m. of the local time, as a result of counterattack, the Russians managed to recapture lost positions on the hill of 215 meters. So for now, it's very difficult to understand. The only thing that we have a lot of video and photo confirmations of dozens, maybe hundreds of dead bodies, and it's very difficult to determine whom these bodies belong to, the Russians or the Ukrainians. And we have some reports that the Russians managed to return control over the settlement. Very interesting video we got from the western part of Klishchiivka. The Ukrainian claims, or the Russian claims, that on this video we can see the evacuation process. The Ukrainian soldiers were trying to evacuate their wounded brother in arms, and this video is a fact geolocated video from this side of the Klishchiivka. If the Ukrainians were evacuating their forces along this forest line, so probably that means that at least today, during the day, there was a clashes even on the western edge of Klishchiivka. So let's wait a little bit. I'm not saying that Ukrainians haven't captured this territory, but I'm not also saying that the Russians have lost their positions. I believe that tomorrow we will gonna see more updates and we will see the final picture, and only then we will be able to tell whether the Ukrainians were able to capture or the Russians were able to defend defeat the Ukrainians. Also, we got another video confirmation from the southern flank. The Ukrainians tank was heading to the Klishchiivka, probably small reinforcement, but the Russians managed to track and destroy it. Okay, of course, this is very important. All these clashes for Klishchiivka, yes, this is really important, and today we got a lot of evidence and proofs that Ukrainians managed to enter the settlement, and there is a very high chances that Ukrainians managed to do this, but the Russians have changed their tactics, and probably, as I understand, the Russians have redeployed a game changer to the combat line. So this is the reason I'm saying that we need to wait another day, because today, for the first time probably since the beginning of the Battle of Klishchiivka, the Russians started publishing the video of Ka-52 on the Bakhmut flanks. And currently this source claims and reported that this video was made on the southern flank of Artyomovsk, so basically in the vicinity of Klishchiivka. So the Russians but were forced to redeploy their let's say Ka-52 attack phase in this area, and the Russians started working against the Ukrainian troopers in this area and against Ukrainian armored vehicles. Of course, it's a game changer. We saw and we remember the videos from Zaporozhye and Vremevka tactical bridgehead, where the Ka-52 were destroyed endless number of Ukrainian armored vehicles, and currently these fighting machines was redeployed to Klishchiivka. Is it a game changer? Yes, this is a game changer. Whether the Ukrainians can shut down Russian Ka-52, I believe they can, but when talking about Vremevka and Zaporozhye, for the entire months of clashes since the beginning of June, the Ukrainians haven't shut down even a single Ka-52 on that part of the front line. So what are the chances that Ukrainians can do the same situation in this area? I believe that the chances are higher, because the Russians are forced to use Ka-52 much closer to the combat line. So maybe the chances are higher. So one more time, let's wait a little bit. In a day or two, we're going to understand the entire situation on this front line and whether the game changer of Ka-52 are able to fix the Russian problems on this part of the front line. Now we're moving to the northern area. There was published a very epic battle of Ukrainian offensive operation. The Ukrainians were using 4 armored vehicles to attack the trenches. First seconds was very successful. The entire Russian platoon was destroyed. Just one soldier survived. But after that, the Russians called artillery fire, and the Ukrainians were completely defeated and were forced to step back from this area. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, starting from Mariinka to, let's say, Siversk bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 340 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks, and 6 artillery systems. The Russians managed to repel 25 attacks of the Ukrainians on this bridgehead. And now we are moving to one of the most interesting, at least from my point of view, the battle for, let's say, the battle not for bridgehead, but the battle with 10 Mountain Assault Brigade. As I follow other mappers, other channels, and I see that nobody provides any piece of information regarding this bridgehead. Nobody analyzed this area, but as I understand, this is one of the most important battles on the flanks of Artyomovsk and during the special military operation. And the Ukrainians continue bombing and shelling and attacking Russian positions on this forest line. Today, the forces of 8 separate mountain assault battalion of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade published a very long video of the real battle of Sporne, let's call it Battle of Sporne, of the south of Berestove probably, and they show the video from probably the beginning of July till today. So the battle continues for around 20 days. The Russians attacked the Ukrainian positions in this forest line from Berestove along this forest line, and as a result of that attack, using armored vehicles, we can see this on the first seconds of this video, the Russians managed to capture this territory. After that, the Russians moved their infantry and they established control over this bridgehead. The Ukrainians were forced to step back, mainly the forces of 10 Mountain Assault Brigade, but later the Ukrainians launched their counterattack, but that was some kind of specific counterattack. The Ukrainians weren't using tanks, infantry. The Ukrainians were hunting and attacking the Russians just using drones and just using grenades and so on. For now, as I understand, the Ukrainians still haven't returned control over this forest line. The Russians are there for more than 20 days, and the situation on this flank of Artyomovsk reminds me completely the situation in the vicinity of coal mine in Marinka. The Russians, as a result of very fast attack, managed to capture important stronghold, important frontline, part of the front line, and currently the Ukrainians don't have enough of armored vehicles, enough of power to counterattack and to return these positions. And every single day the Russians are improving their positions. Of course, the Russians have significant losses either in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka and in the vicinity of Berestova, but the Russians continue improving their positions every single day. They're digging deeper and deeper every single day, and the chances for the Ukrainians to make successful counterattack is becoming less and less every single day as well. This is a very important area. Of course, if the Russians are able to save control over the railroad ways, they will, after a few days, maybe a week, they will continue developing their bridgehead to the north, and they will attack the Ukrainians along the railroad ways with one purpose. And from this bridgehead, for example, if the Russians can develop their attack to the north, and if they're able to capture all these forest lines, of course, there are going to be a very high risks for the Ukrainians to be encircled in Vysyola. And then this is going to be a very critical situation for the Ukrainians, because from these forest lines, the Russians are able to attack to the west, are able to attack to the southwest, the Russians will be able to attack to the north, and the Russians will be able to attack in the back of Sporne, and the Russians will be able to attack. They will get just basically, when talking about the military wars, the Russians will achieve operational square. This battle is very important. Currently, the Russians had more losses in comparison with the Ukrainians, but as I understand, the Russians have already calculated everything for this attack, and they know what they're doing. So we'll see how the situation is going to develop in the future. And the Ukrainians published another video how they were attacking basically this video just a regular geolocation confirmation that the Russians controls the gas station on the east of Sporne, and the Ukrainians were flying with drone and attack Russian positions, dropping grenades and so on. Just another geolocated video that confirms the real position of the front line in this area. Now, when talking about Liman front line, we haven't received any video or photo confirmation of any clashes in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Tarskoye salient, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 4 artillery systems, but without any changes on the ground, without any video or photo confirmation from both sides. As I understand, either the Russians and the Ukrainians doing some kind of regrouping, and in a few days after another phase of clashes for Klishchevka, Vremevka, and let's say Avdiivka, Krasnogorovka ends, the Ukrainians will restart, or the Russians will restart their attack in this salient as well. When talking about Kupiansk front line, there were also no changes. The Russians published thus another video how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in Kislovka and Kotlarovka. These are two settlements, are the next settlements in the Russian offensive list after Novosilovskaya. Of course, they will try to capture this very important area, important towns that located along the railroad ways. If the Russians can capture this territory, they can split the completely Ukrainian forces in many parts, and then they will be able to solve the issues every single part separately. And the Russians reported, the Ministry of Defense reported about more advances of Russians in the forests on the north of Kupiansk in the vicinity of Liman Pervy and Sinkovka. Probably the Russians, the second time during the previous few months, reported about clearing and capturing the railroad station. As I understand, this map, this front line is not accurate according to the Ministry of Defense. I believe that the Russians haven't entered the southern part of this area, and probably the Russian area of control ends along this red line, and everything that is on the top of this red line is on the Russians, and everything that on the south is under Ukrainian control. But for now, I will adjust the map because at least the updates that we got confirms just this progress. Anyway, the Russians advancing and they're moving closer to the Kupiansk. The Ministry of Defense reported as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. The level of losses is very heavy, and the level of losses from day to day increase for another 5 or 10 soldiers per day, let's call it like this. And also the Russians published another video of destroyed Ukrainian ammo depots and warehouses along the border with Russian Federation. For some reason, the Ukrainians keep some personnel very close to the combat line, to the border. The Russians managed to track, to discover, and to destroy Ukrainian positions, but for now we still haven't received the number of real losses. So this is the situation. We see that the Russians raised the stakes, and mainly I'm talking about Odessa and about the warning that every single ship will be considered as a ship that moves some weapon to Ukraine. I believe that this is the most, the tastiest piece of cake for the United Kingdom and the United States of America, to send at least a ship under their flag and to see the reaction of Moscow. And I believe that they will test the Russians, they will test their words. And if the Russians announced that they will consider, that means that they are ready for another wave of escalation. Very interesting. I believe that the second half of the summer is going to be really hot. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.